אוקיי. בוקר טוב, שבוע טוב. הרב צבי יהודה הכהן קוק, the hero of our show today, passed away in the year 1982, תשמ"ב. And at the same year, a few months later, the famous Israeli author named Amos Oz, a secular Israeli author, very well known, went to a journey in different places in Eretz Israel. He was not only an author, he was also a political activist, and he wanted to meet. There was, not surprising, at that time was also a time of great rift and dispute, political dispute in Israel. And he wanted to meet with people, to speak with them, to hear from them, and maybe also to respond and to answer. And he later, he recorded his meetings in a book named מפה ומשם בארץ ישראל, from here and from there in Eretz Israel. And one of the visits that he made was in Ofra. And there he wanted to speak with the settlers, with the מתנחלים. And when he heard from them, and he also gave himself a speech there. And in it, he coined a term that I think really caught on, and I think we use it to this day. And he said regarding the religious Zionism, regarding ציונות דתית, he said that, and he's speaking in 1982, and that is about 7 years after the establishment of Gush Emunim and the earnest beginning of the settlers movement of תנועת ההתנחלות. And he says the דתיים were always in the restaurant car, if you would imagine a train. So they would be the משגיחי כשרות in the restaurant. And suddenly they want to be the driver. They advanced to the engine. And this image, which of course is generalizing, but there is a lot of truth to it. And when you ask yourself, what was the power that propelled, that pushed religious Zionism from the restaurant car to the engine car, to the driver's seat? And in many aspects, the answer is the hero of our shiur, Rav Tzvi Yehuda הכהן Kook, and the yeshiva that he headed for decades, Yeshivat Merkaz Harav. And that would be the story of our hero today, of the shiur today. Rav Tzvi Yehuda was born in 1891. So go now 90 years back from, we spoke about 1982. We are now going 90 years earlier to 1891 on Leil HaSeder. He was born on Leil HaSeder and passed away on Purim. These are days of Geulah, of redemption. So he was born on Leil HaSeder to his father, of course, the very famous Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook. Rav Kook was back then a rav in a small city in Lithuania called Zemel. And so Rav Tzvi Yehuda was born there. And for the first two or three, even to an extent, over the first 3 decades of his life, the man that was responsible primarily for his chinuch was, of course, his great father, who learned with him. But he also hired from him other teachers, both for Torah and also for other, what we would call today secular studies. In Kafchet Iyar, of course, a date that would later become the day of Shichrur Yerushalayim, but on Kafchet Iyar 1904, that is 63 years before Shichrur Yerushalayim, the family makes Aliyah. So Rav Kook comes with Rav Tzvi Yehuda and another sister. They come to Eretz Israel, and continues to learn again under his father, also in some Talmud Torah. And in 1906, 2 years later, so he's now 14 years old, He's 14 years old, and he's being sent to Yerushalayim. Rav Kook is still not in Yerushalayim. He's still the Rav of Yafo and the new settlements, והמושבות. But he wants his son to learn. Of course, there was more Torah in Yerushalayim than in Yafo. So he sends his son to Yerushalayim. And Rav Tzvi Yehuda is sitting there in a yeshiva that was back then was famous. It was called Torat Chaim. And he's learning there for 2 years. In 1908, Rav Kook himself establishes a yeshiva, תודה רבה, in Yafo named Sha'arei Torah. And he calls his son to join him in Sha'arei Torah to learn and also maybe to begin to teach to the younger students and to help him. And if you look at the first source, we have here a letter. Just a second. I would also share it in the Zoom. So in the first source, you have a letter that Rav Kook wrote at that same year. And it's a letter to one of Rav Kook's disciples that was also a teacher of Rav Tzvi Yehuda. So they have a very good connection. And that's what he writes to him. הנני משתוקק לכתוב לך בארוכה, יקירי ואהובי. So again, this is the Rav Kook, the father, writes to his friend. He says, I would have loved to write at length, my beloved, my dear, אבל פיזור נפשי על כמה סעיפים וחיובים שונים ומשונים זה מזה, ימנע אותי לעת עתה מעבודה מסודרת. But he says, unfortunately, I have so many preoccupations and duties and responsibilities, I am unable even to sit and write a long letter as would have been befitting my love to you. ברוך השם שאני יכול לצאת ידי חובתי כמעט במכתבו של בני שיחיה. So he says, I am happy, thank God, that I can be yotze my duty. I can perform my duty of writing you a long letter, although I am not writing. My son will write to you. Why? אשר הוא תודה לאל כמעט אחד עמי. That's an amazing sentence. He says, it's my feeling that my son and myself are almost one. We are almost the same. Now he's a 14 years old guy. המתרגל לעמוד על דעתי. So he's being trained to always understand my thoughts. That's what Rav Kook says about Rav Tzvi Yehuda. ולהקשיב את שיח נשמתי. Again, that's a sentence. He can listen, he can hear to the, I would almost say, the self-monologue, says Rav Kook, that is in my soul. The only one that can hear it is my son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda. נפשו ברוך השם טהורה. So his soul is pure ועדינה and gentle, והוא מבוסם ברוך השם בהמון רעיונות טובים ומהירים. Says he is מבוסם, perfumed, with so many beautiful and bright ideas. שיהיו בעזרת השם לברכה לו ולעולם. So that's a father writing about his son. But I think this is a very special relationship in which someone can say about his son that he is the only one that can listen to my inner monologue, to the monologue of my soul. And to the rest of his life, Rav Tzvi Yehuda would be, in many ways, he would be the shofar that would sound to Am Yisrael, to the universe, you may say, the Torah of Rav Kook. Because Rav Kook, who was, of course, doesn't need my approval, but he was a great genius. However, he was such a genius that it was very difficult for him to write in an organized fashion. And he himself writes about it. And that would be because he would write, and he would write in inspiration. And sometimes the page he would finish the page, but he would need to write what is bubbling up his soul, and he would continue to write on a napkin, on the table, on other pages. So that was the type of writing and teaching that he would do. And that meant that it is very difficult to this day. It is very difficult to learn the writings of Rav Kook, not only for those that are less maybe used to Hebrew, but also for regular Hebrew speakers. the writings of Rav Kook are difficult to learn, they are difficult to read, they are difficult to understand. And what Rav Tzvi Yehuda would do as the one that got a haskama, a stamp from Rav Kook, he understands me. Right? That's what we read here, and Rav Kook would repeat it again and again later. Then Rav Tzvi Yehuda would see it as the mission of his life to make the Torah of Rav Kook accessible, of course, according the emphasis that Rav Tzvi Yehuda would understand is the right emphasis. Now, not only that he wanted the Torah of his father to be understood in an intellectual way, or even that people would identify with it in an emotional way. He strove to make the Torah of his father the power engine. He understood that the teachings of his father are special because his father was able to listen to the way Hashem speaks with us through history. And that meant that Rav Kook was able to see the situation as it was developing in the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And Rav Kook was able to see far into the future, that we speak here about a state, and we speak here about the gathering of the exiles, and we speak here about the beginning of redemption. While many people were just looking and so that's such a puny thing, so miserable. What are you speaking? That's Geulah, that's redemption. A few guys walking from side to side in Eretz Israel, not even able many times to hold their positions, not able to grow anything. The whole thing is ridiculous. And Rav Kook was able to see through it. And he was able to argue with the people from, you may say, the religious right, that claim, no, because they are secular, we want nothing to do with them. He said, no, if that's the redemption, if this is the messengers God picked for the redemption, then we need to cooperate with them. And on the other hand, you may say from the left who said, okay, you see, we need to throw all religion out because the only way to settle the land is to be secular, because you see that the settlers are, at least from a certain point and on, their majority are secular. And he said, no, we need to inject spirituality into this Zionist project. And by that, Rav Kook was very unique and in the background of the rabbinical voice. And Rav Tzvi Yehuda wanted to take this insight of Rav Kook and turn it into a workable program, something that can be executed, not only lofty ideas. And you need, in order to do that, A, you need to translate the Torah, and B, you need to grow people that would be acceptable for this type of teachings, and that would be able and willing to carry them out. And these would be the great two missions of the life of Rav Tzvi Yehuda. One would be from up down, to take his father's Torah and to, again, I'm using the word translate, although of course not from a language to language, but to translate it into the language of his generation and also into the language of Acts. And B, from down up, to take the guys that were going around, the boys that were going around that were not necessarily aspiring for Torah. There were many competing ideas were in the market of the time. And he would take them, and he would grow them, and he would take the Torah and bring it down. And so he would be able to do this combination. That would not be a project for a day or for a week or for a year or even for 10 years. As we'll see, it took him many decades to reach to the point of success that he eventually had. So as I said, he's sitting there in Yafo right now. He's editing the first book his father published, was a book about Shemitah. And that was part of the debate about the Heter Mechira. And he is the editor of the book. So he is, let's see, he is 18. And that's not an easy book. It's a book that includes both Hashkafa and Halacha. Very deep book. And he is the editor. When you think about editor, we do not mean someone that just edit, language corrections. This is someone that is deeply involved in the content. However, he felt that he's still too young. If he would completely be drawn after his father into public service, then he would not be able to grow the way that he felt that he needs to grow in Torah himself, and also the way that his father wanted him to grow. So in 1911, he left Yafo, he left his father, and he went back to Yerushalayim, this time to a Sephardic yeshiva, that is Yeshivat Porat Yosef, which was destroyed after Milchemet Ha'atzmaut, after the Jordanian conquered the Rova. However, it was rebuilt. Baruch Hashem, now today it's a big yeshiva, and you can see it when you go down to the Kotel. You see it's a very big building, a beautiful building. And he went there, he hoped that he would be able to hide there, because it was a Sephardic yeshiva, it was an Ashkenazi yeshiva, and he hoped that people would not, because people would always wanted to use him as a bridge to his father, was an important man. So he hoped that if he would go to Porat Yosef, he would be able to sit there and to duck the paparazzi, would say. And so he's sitting there. He's also, while he's learning Torah, he's also publishing an article that is, I think it's his first article, which is called Hatarbuta Israelit, Israeli culture. And he writes it anonymously. He doesn't want his name to appear, but it's being published in one of the periodicals. And in it, his argument is that while Zionism had this idea that the Zionist project or the Zionist movement, that was one of the laws that they passed in one of the first congresses of Zionism, was that Zionism has nothing to do with religion. That way they hoped they would be able to not to have to take a stand in the big dispute between the seculars and the religious. So Zionism is just about coming to the land and creating a state. And what would be the content of the state? Would be religious? That's not a question to the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement, that was Herzl's idea. Zionist movement would be is a political movement, a clean political movement. Does not involve. Now, Rav Kook was now we have to understand some of the religious elements in the Zionist movement blessed this decision, because they thought, yeah, that's why they would not intervene in the, let's say that there would be schools, right? The Zionist movement beginning to establish schools in Eretz Israel. So if Zionism has nothing to do with religion, that would mean that Zionism would fund both secular schools and religious schools. If the Zionist movement would have to take a stand, then they may choose to be secular, and then would be in a big problem. So some of the Mizrahi movement were very happy with this declaration that Zionism has nothing to do with religion. Rav Kook was a guest. For him, it was an epikorsut, a heresy. To say that Zionism is the beginning of redemption, how can it be nothing to do with religion? Am Israel is fulfilling the ancient prophecies and come to his homeland, to his holy homeland. And you say that this has nothing to do with religion. He couldn't accept it. If Zionism has nothing to do with religion, then Rav Kook wants to have nothing to do with Zionism, if you want to take it to the extreme. So he fought tooth and nail against this declaration. He was alone, because to the Haredi, they didn't care what the Zionist Congress has declared. And then they said the Mizrahi, who were part of the Zionist movement, they were happy that the Zionist movement would not intervene in the Mizrahi schools, etc. And for the seculars, they saw it as a way to just delay the arguments. But Rav Yehuda is publishing this article about Israeli culture, and he says we have to understand what culture is. Culture is what is created by the people according to their conditions of life, and it is what enables them to educate the next generation to the same values. That is culture in the broad sense. And it's a very interesting article in the sense that he's also giving he quotes sociological studies, because he has a broad knowledge, and he quotes non-Jewish studies as well. And he explains what culture is. And then he says, if you take a Jew and you put him in Eretz Israel, then whatever he creates would be the Israeli culture. You cannot say that it is detached from the Jewish religion. Saying that it is detached, that in itself means that it is anti-religious. Because you cannot sit. That is like saying, you know, I'm now in Yom Kippur, but I don't want to have a stand regarding Yom Kippur. So I'm eating regularly. You cannot say that you do not take a stand. If you eat regularly, that means that you defy Yom Kippur. If you sit in Eretz Israel and you think that you create secular Israeli culture, then that is not detached. That is not disconnected from Jewish religion. That is anti-Jewish religion. And what we must do is create the real authentic Israeli culture. What would be the real authentic Israeli culture? It would be sophisticated. No, help me. I mean, ravui. Satiated. Yeah, thank you. Satiated with religion, with God. Otherwise, it is not Jewish. It's not Israeli. So you cannot run away from what was back then called milchamot kultura, because you have to understand, we use culture here in English, but these words are very similar also in Eastern European languages. But there it's not called culture, but kultura. So milchamot kultura would be translated as wars, culture wars. And milchemet hatarbut, we would call it today in Hebrew. And you would say you cannot run away from it. And just declaring you have nothing to do with religion, that's in itself a declaration of war against religion. So that's an article. Obviously, it continues his father way, but again, he's trying to write it in a manner that would be understandable for everyone. So it's not an easy read, this article. It's not an easy read. At least for me, I said, and it took me time to go from, it's only 5-6 pages, but it took me time to understand exactly what he wants. But maybe I had more difficulties with the quotes that he had from the non-Jewish researchers of culture than with the idea himself. But he was trying, obviously he was trying again, he was trying to communicate his father's idea to a broader audience. And he was experiencing with ways how to do that. In 1914, he decides that he cannot even stay in Porat Yosef because, again, he was discovered. And he was undercover, but now he's discovered. So he, again, needs to run away. And he, with his father, together in one advice, they decide that he cannot stay in Eretz Israel. It's just too small. And if you'd stay here, you won't be able to sit and learn. He needs to go to Chutz La'aretz in order to sit and learn. He was a lover of Eretz Israel, as not many others had been. And I can only imagine how difficult it was for him to leave Eretz Israel. However, the Gemara says in Masechet Avodah Zarah that there are 3 legitimate reasons why one would be allowed, if one is in Eretz Israel, why would be allowed to exit. So one is to marry, in order to marry. The second one is for business. And the third one is for Torah learning. So these are the 3 reasons that the Gemara gives. And he says, so if the Gemara says it is legitimate, not legitimate, maybe advisable. If that is the only way that you can learn Torah, then you should go to Chutz La'aretz to learn Torah. So that's what he did. And in 1914, he goes to Halberstadt in Germany. And he learns there also languages. And again, some border education, but also mainly he was learning there Torah. At the summer, his father comes, 1914. And some of you that has general history maybe know what is going to happen next. But his father comes both to visit him in Germany, and also they have the Zionist convention, the Agudat Israel convention in Zurich. However, so he visits his son, they learn a little, and then he continues to the convention. However, a few weeks later, in Tisha B'Av of 1914, the First World War breaks, and Rav Kook is stranded. So because all of them are now citizens of it's not Palestine, it's Eretz Israel, but it's under Ottoman Empire. So they are citizens of the Ottoman Empire. And Western Europe is at war with the Ottoman Empire. If you remember I don't remember, the Haskama, how it's called? The Axis is the Second World War, I think. The First World War is the Haskama and the others. I can't remember their names. Excuse me? The mother is missing. That's, yeah, you are absolutely right. I apologize. The mother was also, of course, she gave birth to him. And of course, he learned, we would speak, I think, more about the topic of mothers when he would get married, because it takes more of a precedence. I apologize. In the sources, just not emphasized so much. But you're absolutely right. The mother was also there in Germany. I think she went with Rav Kook. It seems that also there was some type of a medical need for her. It was part of the reason for the trip. Be it as it may, all of them are now stranded in Zurich. In Germany, they are being jailed when they are in Germany, because as I said, they are citizens of an enemy nation. After they are being naturalized, it took some time. Then they moved to Switzerland, which is, of course, natural, as they always have been. So they moved to Switzerland, and he stays there with his father. He said that at that period, when he was with his father in Switzerland, there were no one to bother them because they were just stranded somewhere. They were able to finish the whole Torah twice. I am not sure what does it mean. What does it include when you say that you have finished the whole Torah? But obviously it's a lot, and it's with his father, so it's very special. Later, his father goes to London and becomes there the Rav of the shul. I think it's called Shomrei Shabbat. So he becomes Rav Kook becomes he cannot return to Turkey to Eretz Israel, so he becomes a Rav in England, and that's a shiur by itself I gave a few months ago, I think a year ago already. And Rav Yehuda remains in Switzerland, and he continues to learn there. After the end of the First World War, so we are already in 1918, 1919, and Rav Kook has this idea to establish a new movement that would be like a complementary to the Zionist movement, and he would call it Degel Yerushalayim, because he thought that would be Zion and Yerushalayim, and Zion would be about the material building of the state, and he would establish Degel Yerushalayim, which would be the spiritual building. And so he would not, that's the way that he thought that he would be able to inject, as I said, spirituality, to inject neshama into the body that is being built by the Zionists. And Rav Yehuda is beginning to run all over Europe and try to secure funds. That's, of course, the first thing you need. And also to convince rabbis to join. It was very, very difficult. And everyone was very skeptical. As you can imagine, people didn't know where things are heading. So when you do not know where things are heading, then the first thing you do is stop in your tracks. That's just human nature. Now, obviously, everyone that did it between the wars made the worst mistake, because when you stop in your tracks and then you are getting trapped in Europe, then that was a disaster. But it's human nature. I think it's difficult to blame people for not being able to foresee the future. When someone is able to foresee the future, we praise him. But if someone fails to foresee the future, then I don't think that we can blame him for that. And unfortunately, many rabbis, also many leaders of the communities, were not able to foresee where things are going. So Rav Kook came to them, and Rav Yehuda came to them, and they were trying to convince them to invest in this new thing that is happening in Eretz Israel. And when they look at it, it seemed completely treif, and almost no Torah learning, no yeshivot, no. If there are rabbanim, they are part of the old settlement, but not part of the new Zionist movement. It's lehefech, right? The whole of the new yeshuvim, the kibbutzim, they are completely secular, anti-religious. and do all of the averot in the world. And of course, as in this happens in this type of times and areas, then the Lashon Hara celebrates, and it's not enough the averot that people already have. You have to add, and things go completely out of proportion. So rabbis said, okay, it's a nice idea, and we appreciate Rav Kook, we appreciate you, Rav Yehuda, but we do not sign something that we are not sure where it is heading. Of course, you can never know that when you do not sign something because you don't know where it is heading, you sign to stay where you are. Now, we think that we know where we are is heading, but that is not always the case. So the bottom line is that the initiation failed. Degel Yerushalayim was never really able to raise from the ground and to lift itself. In 1920, he returns to Eretz Israel, and now he moves to Petach Tikva. He's teaching there in what we call a yeshiva, a high school yeshiva, yeshiva לצעירים. So he's teaching there, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, and he's also beginning to edit the Sefer Orot. Sefer Orot, meaning lights, according to Rav Tzvi Yehuda, is the main book of his father. And what Rav Tzvi Yehuda tried to do there is to give voice to what he saw as the most fundamental basic elements of his father's Torah, and they could be in a way summarized by Eretz Israel and Torat Israel and Am Israel. Right? So that's basically what Sefer Orot is about, and he's taking short paragraphs from his father and he's gluing them together. Also, he's editing them to be more, again, accessible. Sometimes he's also softening them. So if there is something that would create too much of an opposition from the right, then he smooths it over. And that's what he's doing. Nowadays that we have the original notebooks of Rav Kook, then some studies were made. What was the type, the nature of editing that Rav Tzvi Yehuda did for very advanced learners? That's interesting, but for us, I believe that just studying Orot would be enough for the time being. And as I said, it's not an easy book. There are a few English translations with, I would say, with varying success that have been made, but it's a very basic book. If you want to understand Rav Kook, then Orot is still, I think, the most basic entrance point to Rav Kook's Torah. Yeah. That's a very good question. That's an excellent question. Almost nobody. Yeah, as I said, there were two missions. One mission was to take his father's Torah and to translate it. And the other was to try and grow people that would be interested in his father's Torah. And a certain part of the story we told last week when we spoke about Rav Neria. So Rav Neria was also dealing basically with these two missions, but he was more engaged with the younger crowd, we may say. And Rav Tzvi Yehuda would be the one to take the older ones and to shape them. But it would take a lot of time. Now he's only, in the years that we're speaking about, he's only dealing with the writings, with the Torah. And as of now, you're right, almost without clients. He's creating a product and hope that someone would buy it. He believes in the product. In 1922, he goes back to Chutz La'aretz in order again to try and revive Degel Yerushalayim. Rav Kook sees a lot of importance in Degel Yerushalayim. So he's back to Chutz La'aretz to try and revive this innovation. Nothing really comes out of it for Degel Yerushalayim, but one very important thing that happens is that exactly, in 1922, he's already 30. In 1922, 31. He is getting married with Chavalea Hutner from Varsha. Her father was an important Rav in Varsha, and she herself was a very learned woman. She was a social worker. She worked as a social worker in Yerushalayim. She was so devoted to her work that when Rav Yehuda sometimes would go in missions that his father gave him all over Eretz Israel, he never drove a car, so he would always go in buses, basically, or in a horse and a wagon in the beginning. And many times he'd have to sleep where he came because there is no bus back, and maybe only next day or 2 days later. His wife would not agree to abandon the people that she was taking care on Yerushalayim. So she would stay in Yerushalayim while he was going, and she was very devoted. During the winter, there was one winter where she went to hand wood for the furnaces for the poor people that were not able to buy, and she was going on Yerushalayim on rainy, wintry days, very cold, and she got דלקת ריאות. Pneumonia. And that was one of the reasons that unfortunately shortened her short life. He was very dedicated to his wife, very devoted to her. He also had, you may almost say, to his time, very progressive ideas about women. So, for example, he would teach, I'm in source bet. בגמרא בבבא קמא, that's from his שיחות that he would give on פרשת השבוע in the yeshiva. בגמרא בבא קמא נמצאת הגדרה יסודית. So we find a very basic definition in בבא קמא. השווה כתוב אישה לאיש לכל דינים שבתורה. Now the Gemara there speaks specifically about monetary issues. That regarding monetary issues there is no difference between a man and a woman. However, Rav Yehuda saw that as the basic assertion of the Torah. That men and women are equal to all the dinim, meaning not only the dinim of monetary issues, but he saw that as a bold declaration, as a declaration of equality regarding all halachot. Now, of course, immediately he's being asked, but there is mitzvot aseh shazman grama, there are different halachot that makes a difference. And he would say something that is important to how he saw the status of men and women, but also important to how he saw Torah in general. He says, you should always begin from the general rule and then go to the details. You should never begin from the details. If you begin to ask, what about this type of mitzvah and this type of mitzvah, then you cloud your ability to judge what the Torah really wants to teach you. You need to first ask yourself, what is the general rule? And then later you can go into the small details and you can either understand them or you cannot. Sometimes you do not understand them, which is also fine. But it is important that you understand what is the general guideline that the Torah gives you. So he said the general guideline the Torah gives you is ishva katuv isha leish lechol dinim shebatorah. Meaning there is an equality to all the halachot. Now, are there yotzim min haklal? Are there exceptions? Yes, there are exceptions. And again, we can think about reasons. Yeah, certain. I don't want to go now. It's not a shiur about his views on women, so we will not go more deeper than that. But it's very important to understand that was his basic view, both regarding the question of women in the eyes of the Torah and Chazal, but also regarding Torah at whole. You should always begin from up and then go down, and not the other way around. Don't collect different cases and then ask yourself, how can I harmonize them? Because then you are just being, your thought is being twisted. You should ask yourself, what is the general rule? And then you can ask, so how it would be translated in this specific situation. Maybe that in certain situations it would have a general rule, but in a certain situation, for some reason, it would not apply. So we have a general rule that you need to live in Eretz Israel, but in a certain situation in which the only way you can learn Torah is by going to Chutz, yes, we would allow you to go to Chutz for the term of time you need in order to learn Torah. But if you begin from the exceptions, you come to the conclusion that living in Eretz Israel is not important to Allah, which of course is it's completely false. So you must always begin with the rule and only later go to the exceptions. And that was in his way in life. He would always look for the ideal in a completely different application of the same view of his. So when sometimes prime ministers or other functionaries of the state many years later would not act as he thought is befitting of Medinat Israel, of the beginning of our redemption. So he would always say, a prime minister or a president, the state of Israel, they are important because of their office. And that is a general rule. Now, if there is some exception, we need to deal with the exception, but don't let the exception ruin your understanding of what is really important. So we have respect, because we have respect to the prime minister, we have respect to the president, we have respect to Knesset members. There is someone that is exception, okay, we need to deal with the exception. There is a joke they say, right? That you shouldn't let the Jews ruin your impression of Judaism. So it's in a somewhat of a similar, I don't know if you would approve of the joke, but in a somewhat of a similar fashion, you would say, yes, sometimes the exceptions are very sad, but we should not let go. We should not remove our eyes from the ball. That's how I think he would see it. In 1923, he returns again to Eretz Israel, and Rav Kook goes to Yerushalayim and becomes the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim and for all of Palestine under British mandate. And Rav Kook establishes הישיבה המרכזית העולמית, the World Central Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. Isn't that the right place where the World Central Yeshiva should be? Now, as I said, there is the general idea. Now, in practical, there were 5 students, but it was the central yeshiva of the world. So, yeah, but you see, he believed in that. And when you believe in something, you push and you push and you push for decades. In the end, I don't know if it is the central yeshiva of the world, but it's a very central yeshiva, right? It worked. If we would have just give up, because we would say, okay, I look at the details and the details teach me that the idea is wrong, then you would have closed the doors many years ago. So Rav Kook established this yeshiva and basically makes Rav Tzvi Yehuda the, in practice, manager of the yeshiva. Rav Tzvi Yehuda sits there in great poverty. He's not interested in material at all. We have letters from his father that he wrote to his wife. I guess that he gave up on trying to convince his son. So Rav Kook wrote to Chavalea. He said, please try to convince him to eat more. Because he was not eating, he was very ascetic. That is the word? Ascetic. Throughout all of his life. Rav Tzvi Yehuda was very ascetic. He didn't indulge himself at all. And he's sitting, basically what he does, he's sitting and he's editing his father's writing. He begins with halacha, while most of us would say that the greatest chidush, the novelty of Rav Kook is in his machshava. Rav Tzvi Yehuda said, if I want my father's machshava to be understandable, not just as ideas floating in someone's mind, but as something that stems out of Torah, I need to establish his credentials as a Gaon B'Torah. Now, everyone that knew Rav Kook knew he was a Gaon B'Torah. He didn't need the credentials. But people, if you have a written testimony, that's, of course, completely different, because you don't have to meet him. You see the Sefer, you'd open the response of Rav Kook, you see a genius, see a giant of Torah. And so that is what he was working on. Also editing his own footnotes, which are themselves a trove of Torah and learning. And in 1935, his father passes away. Rav Kook passes away in 1935. As I said, he saw himself the sole responsible for the writing of his father. And he said sentences very extreme, I would say. He said, my father, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, had given me the responsibility of his writings. He relied only on me, and this is, I would now say it in Hebrew, zo achrayut nora'a. It is a terrible responsibility. Now, he saw that with holiness, he saw this mission. Because he said, the ideas of my father are what our generation needs. So it's on my shoulders to transform them. for this new generation. And he also said, אני ההמשך האבסולוטי של אבא. I am the absolute continuation of my father. That is the parallel to what his father said about him. But again, he didn't saw himself as saying any, it's very extreme what I'm going to say now, but he saw himself as a complete continuation of his father. Now, of course, he was different than his father because every person is different from his parents. And you emphasize one thing and you de-emphasize something else. Now, of course, if you ask him, you'd say, yeah, I'm emphasizing what I'm sure my father would have continued to emphasize. Would he be still be with us? And of course, I'm not in any position to argue about what Rav Kook would have emphasized. But he took certain aspects and he gave them the center of the stage. And that was, as I said, nationality, Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, and Torat Yisrael. Rav Kook had other ideas as well that you can find in his writings about individualism, about authenticity, about philosophy. And if you'd look, for example, in how Rav Nazir, Rav David Cohen, in his Horot HaKodesh, he also edited some of Rav Kook's writings, then he is dealing with these topics. But for Rav Tzvi Yehuda, it was, as I said, this trio. Torah, nation, and the land. And he put almost all of his weight on these areas. In 1939 to 1945, we have the Holocaust. And not needed to say, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, as any other Jew, is deeply affected. But he has a very interesting insight about the Holocaust. Which I think I would share with you, and the second half I think we would leave Emir Hashem for next week. And that is something that is not simple, but we would read it together, and that I think it would be an interesting thought to conclude with this the first half of our learning about Rav Tzvi Yehuda. So that is again from one of his sichot, source Gimel. הכל בא בסוד השם. Everything comes from the sod, from the secret of God, the mystery. I think mystery maybe is a better word, the mystery of God. כל סדר ההנהגה האלוקית אינו גלוי. We have to understand that the order of how God leads his word is beyond us, above and beyond. לעשות חקירות בעניין השואה, to begin and make research and studies and in the topic of the Holocaust, ומעשה ילדות. This is something that only child would do, to think that I can give you the reason why that happened. רק בזהירות גדולה ומתוך בגרות רוחנית אפשר לגשת לעניין הנורא הזה. But he doesn't say, now, the next sentence for many of the people that spoke about the Holocaust was, okay, so we cannot speak about it, it's beyond our understanding, it's above our understanding, and we just stay silent. However, he says, no, we need to confront this question. We cannot just be silent. Something terrible happened. Can we just stay silent, not say anything? Torah has nothing to say about maybe the most terrible event in Jewish history, at least in the last 2,000 years. Nothing to say about it. How can it be? But we need to approach it from a mature angle. Mature angle means that we understand that we cannot explain every detail. So that connects to what we spoke earlier. But we can ask the general question. The general question, why did it happen to our nation? That we can ask. We can never know why this specific individual, why he had what happened to him. But the general question about the nation, if we would not learn our lessons from this type of events, then we are sinning. Because God sent us not hints, he sends us messages. And we just say, no, we do not understand. No, we need to ask, we need to try. כשמגיע זמן זה של יציאתנו מחושך הגלות, says when the time to come out of exile, from the dark of exile comes, מופיעים מצבים הדומים לזה של העבד האומר, אהבתי את אדוני. In the Torah we learn that sometimes there is a slave, a Jewish slave. After 7 years he's supposed to go and to be freed. But he says, no, I love my master. I want to remain a slave. Now, Yehuda says, in the same manner, the Jewish people were for 2,000 years. They were enslaved. They were in exile. And now the door opens. You can go to Eretz Israel, you can go back home, you can be free. And the slave says, I love my master. I want to stay enslaved. I don't want to be my own man. I don't want to have my own state. Yeah, I want to remain in exile. Why? Because I have better schools, I have better... For good reasons. I'm not talking about someone just staying for money. He stays there because he thinks that for spiritual reasons, he's staying there. He loves his master. יהודים מתאהבים בגלות ומסרבים לעלות לארץ ישראל. Jews fall in love with the exile and with the diaspora, and they don't want to make aliyah. אבל הגלות אינה יכולה להימשך לעולם ועד. However, the exile cannot remain. Because exile, גלות היא חילול השם היותר... It's a desecration of God's name. That his nation are in exile, they are enslaved, they are being tortured. That is a desecration, it's חילול השם. And that's why כשמגיע זמן הגאולה קורה שיש סיבוכים. When the time of redemption come, it may happen that there would be סיבוכים. How would you say סיבוך? Complexities. Complications. It's like, it's a medical word. You would see that he would use medical metaphors. וחלק גדול מעם ישראל נדבק בזפת הגלות. So a large portion of the Jewish people, they stuck in zefet. How do you say that? That's what you put on the roads. Tar. So they are now, they are stuck in the tar. We say they are stuck in the web, right? The spider web. And they cannot relieve themselves. כך היא העובדה. It's a fact. It may seem strange to us. But, well, we saw it happening, right? We see it happening. It may seem strange to us why Jews were not happy to leave Egypt. Back then, when Moshe Rabbeinu told them, we can leave, God is sending us free. And they did not believe, it says in the Torah. מקוצר רוח ומעבודה, they did not believe. How can it be? It can be. It's a fact. It's a human fact. הרבה יהודים התרגלו לטומאת הגלות. Many Jews got used to the tuma of exiles. ומסרבים לעזוב אותה. They refused to leave it, to abandon it. ואפילו צדיקים גדולים. Even the great righteous people. Sometimes קשורים לגלות וטומאתה. They got connected, got tied, bonded to the exile, and to its impurity, to its tuma, and they cannot disconnect themselves. אז מתחיל טיפול אלוקי פנימי, עמוק ונסתר של התארות מטומאה. Then you need to make yourself back pure, to purify yourself. And so God begins a treatment, that's how I call it, a treatment. Maybe we would say today a chemo. And ניתוח, he says it's a surgery. And healing. כל המיליונים שבישראל הם יחד גוף אחד. We should look at all of the Jewish people as one organism and one body. So again, you see how he always looks from the general view. He says all of Am Israel is one body, all the millions. אורגניזם אחד. וכשהוא מתעכב מהבראתו, and you cannot heal it because it is stuck. One of its, you may say, one of its limbs is stuck in the tar. And you try to disconnect, you try to remove, but you are stuck. And let's say, chas v'chalila, right? So now you are stuck, someone is stuck on the railroad. And the train is coming. And you see no other way. The only way to disconnect yourself is by what he says here in an undertone, a surgery. Meaning, cut it off. וכשהוא מתעכב מהבראתו בגלל דבקותו בארץ העמים, יש צורך בניתוח אלוקי אכזרי. You need he says אכזרי, a cruel treatment by God. It's cruel in the first sense. It's part of the healing. לא מדובר כאן בחשבון עם פלויני או אלמוני. So he says again, we do not speak about a certain man. We don't blame someone for not making aliyah. I don't think we can blame someone for not being able to foresee the future. But that is Sod Hashem, Sod HaNeshamot. Meaning, to know why each soul gets what it gets, it's beyond us. It's a mystery. אלא בניתוח במובן הכללי, but we have to look from the general point of view, he says, this is the reason. That's what he sees. בגלל המציאות של וימאסו בארץ חמדה, זה פרשת השבוע, right, that's the spies, that they despised, they chose not to come to the wonderful land, to the promised land. ניתוח המביא את העם לניתוק מן הגלות. There was no other way but to do this surgery that would cause then the great escape from Europe and everything that we know that happened later, וחזרה לארץ ישראל מקום חייהם. That's what he writes, and he said it many times. I would say that מורי ורבי הרב יהודה עמיטל, זכר צדיק לברכה, opposed that vehemently. He felt that these type of words are irresponsible, they are not right, you are not allowed to say them. That you cannot say that that's why God did it. You cannot say that you know, and you cannot blame, even if you declare that you do not blame the individuals, but you blame Am Israel. Who you got a message from upstairs? How do you know that? Who knows why it happened? You should not impose yourself as speaking in the name of God when you did not get a prophecy. No, that was Rav Amital's position, and that's what I was educated. That's what I was told. But I do think that what Rav Yehuda here has carry its own force. And you know, I laid before you both positions, and you decide, of course, each one for itself. That is his view on the Holocaust, and again we see again and again his generalities, his way, and that was what I think very powerful about him, his ability to uplift himself from the details and to look at big ideas, big moves. That's also sometimes a source of weakness, we may say, or problems, because when you uplift yourself so much, sometimes you disconnect from what is going on the ground. Now, this type of questions would continue to accompany us, Bezrat Hashem, next week, as we would speak about his activity after the establishment of Medinat Israel. May you have a good week.
תודה רבה.
כל טוב.